We are back again for the UFC preview show. Myself and Harry Powell are here to preview the latest installment. We're back in the Apex. We have a middleweights topping the bill. That's Marvin Vettori and Jared Cannonier. We're going to face off in the middleweight division. Like I said, my guy Arman Tsarukyan is back in the cage. He takes on Joaquim Silva in the co-main event. We're going to talk about those fights. We're going to talk about the rest of the card as well, go in depth on the main card, and just nitpick at some of the prelim fights over the course of the next 45 minutes or so. Harry, young sir, how are you doing? What's the excitement levels like for this card? It's not a bad card, I've got to say. There's a couple of decent fights spread out through around it, a couple of interesting storylines. You know, we have Christian Leroy Duncan, we have Modestas Bukauskas for that like UK Ireland interest as well. Yeah, a couple of nice fights sprinkled on this one, and I have to say I'm looking forward to it kind of playing out.
Look, I think Sean and I and Spencer and I have sort of had conversations over the last couple of days, and we kind of had a speaker's corner about it. Sean and I, it will come out at some point in the near future, and it was around like the question I asked Sean was, how do you make a good card? Like there's so much rhetoric online about, every card's garbage. And if it hasn't got this fighter or that fighter, if they haven't got a number next to their name or this or that, it's a shit card. And I'm like, okay, well, let's look at this from a slightly different perspective. Like, what is it that makes a good card? How do you make a good card? Because if we were to be very, very honest, then most of the cards that we say are bad, quote unquote, live, they turn out to be fine. Like, you know, there could be a couple of dud fights, but more often than not, the fights turns out to be good. Like on that Canada show we just had, on paper, not the strongest card. On the night, a fantastic night of fights. Loads of fun was had. The only fight we can argue was really bad was the opener. And look, it's the opening card. If you go to a boxing bout or a boxing show, the first 5 or 10 fights are relatively low level. And so I think from the perspective of this card, don't get me wrong, the next one, UFC on ABC 5, Emmett versus Topuria, not just that main event, but that whole card is unbelievable for a fight night card. But like you've said, I'll just do a very, very quick run through of the names we can be interested on this one. So we have Marvin Vettori, Jared Cannonier. Okay, that probably has title ramifications, but it's not the most interesting fight.
It's an interesting stylistic fight now, and I know we'll get into it, but run through the rest of the card.
We have Arman Tsarukyan, both of us absolutely massive fans of Arman Tsarukyan. Okay, he's not fighting Renato Moicano. Fine, these things happen. So Joaquim Silva is in there. I think it's a very stern test for Joaquim Silva, but, you know, look, this is MMA. These things happen. Christian Leroy Duncan fighting Arman Petrosian is a fantastic test for Christian Leroy Duncan. I think we're going to see him look fantastic in that fight too, but you know, let's find out. Pat Sabatini, Lucas Almeida. Almeida has a forward-facing style. Pat Sabatini himself has a forward-facing style. Fun fight. Nicholas Motta, we get to see him come back and see if he can get a win in the UFC. Muslim Salikov, Nicholas Dalby is a European banger, like an absolute European banger. Hani Barcelos, I'm never, ever, ever going to turn down a Hani Barcelos fight. Kyoyon Kang versus Christian Cannonier, fine. And then, you know, we go through the card. Zalgas is on there. Forget Zalgas. Teresa Blader's coming back. I'm interested to see how she looks in her next performance. I've always had a soft spot for Ronnie Lawrence, even though he can be a bit of a shithouse. And then at the very bottom of the card is Modestas Bukauskas. And as you've already said, European interest flying high. Like, it's not a bad card at all.
And that's the thing. And I mean, Spencer's done all so well in kind of trying to label these cards. And he's done quite well in saying that these Apex cards are probably of lower standard than what we would see with maybe an ESPN card or a pay-per-view card. But this for an Apex card, if you want to label it that way, is not too bad. It's not too shabby at all. What makes a good card, you asked as well. For me, it's fights that have some meanings. It's with athletes that, you know, have a future in the division. And I have to say, you know, given this card has lots of fighters that I would expect to have good futures, and some fighters that have been in the divisions for a long time as well. UFC have been guilty of putting on two fights or a couple of fights where you're watching him play out and you can see by the quality that you don't think that either fighter is going to make a splash into the division, and that kind of takes away from the viewing experience no matter what you think the card is on paper. But like you said, the majority of the time the cards do deliver. Like, a fight is a fight at the end of the day. A name value you can take for name value. You can enjoy it. Look, if we come on here and I can say this is a good card, I can say it's a bad card, and I'm always going to say that. But I'm not going to go out and out of my way to tweet it out, or, you know, to try and belittle any of the athletes there too. But I mean, my interest is my interest, and other interest is other people's interests or other people's interests. But I would never ever say that I would, and it's a great term Spencer's used recently, I'd never say I would hate watch any of these cards. And you know, this is definitely not one that people are going to be able to hate watch anyway. So let's get into the main event, Harry. Let's go in and talk Marvin Vettori and Jared Cannonier. And, you know, talking about meaning, talking about jeopardy, talking about good stylistic fights. You know, this has a little bit of it sprinkled across this fight. Stylistically, these two guys are very similar in how they approach, where they're very technical striking. They don't take too many chances inside the octagon. And I feel that this fight may not necessarily be an exciting fight, but I feel tactically it's going to be a very intriguing fight. And I would label fights exciting kind of under different terminology. Yeah, you have your exciting Islam Makhachev and Volkanovski fight, where it's super technical, super high skilled, and you know, just a very entertaining fight. Then you have your Dustin Poirier, Justin Gaethje's, where it's just two mad bastards firing punches at one another, and you're getting the violence entertainment. I think this entertainment will fall under the bracket of two high-level technical fighters that are very, very similarly matched, and it's a fight that's kind of tough to call on paper. When you're looking at both of these guys, how do you see them matching up?
So I think Marvin Vettori is a more well-rounded fighter. He has more grappling offense, and I actually think that one of the more underrated parts of his game is his striking defense, specifically his boxing defense. He is a fighter, and I've heard people talk about this, but this is a massive. They call him a robot, right? He used to train at London Shoot Fighters, which is the gym I used to train at, and one of the coaches there used to call him a robot, and he wasn't meaning it negatively at all. He was meaning it that you give him a game plan, and he'll just execute the game plan. He won't deviate. He's not going in there and trying to be flashy and whatever. He just wants to win. And if he believes in your game plan and he agrees with your game plan, he'll go out there and he'll execute said game plan to the best of his ability until he either wins or he loses. And so you can tell that when he's training and when he's fighting, Rafael Cordero has decided on a game plan for him, and he goes out and he executes that game plan. And something I think that will prove potential dividends in this fight is Cannonier is somebody, like you said, it doesn't take a ton of risks and doesn't have a massive voluminous output. Well, if Marvin Vettori, Jesus Christ, sorry, we started already, lads. We're not even 10 minutes in. If Marvin Vettori can set a pace both with offensive grappling, whether that's pushing him against the fence and draining his arms a little bit, threatening some takedowns, and then add on some of the striking, I think he's good enough to keep himself safe in those striking exchanges, or at least to roll with the shots enough that he can land his own. But I just feel like unless Cannonier lands something big, which we don't see Marvin Vettori take massive shots often, I feel like Marvin Vettori is going to have the both tactical and technical advantages in this fight.
Yeah, very well said. Like, I would also notice that about Marvin Vettori, which is a very underrated kind of aspect to bring into your game, into the octagon, is the ability to carry out a game plan and to kind of stick to it throughout there. What we seen with Marvin Vettori the last time too, though, Harry, was him changing a few things up, not making any drastic changes, but, you know, the introduction of leg kicks and a few other different kind of skills that he brought in, where, you know, you're not massively overhauling, but you're adding in little things. And that, to me, I would have to give him max respect for that too, because it's hard to do it at this stage, especially where he's at in his career with so many fights in. You're talking a guy who's 25 fights now, and you've talked and you've spoken so well about it before. When you are this late into your career, it is more difficult to kind of bring new wrinkles into your style and everything like that. But I'll be interested to see if he adds a few more in here. My biggest fear coming into this fight is that we're going to be going on Groundhog Day. This is going to be a close fought fight, Harry. Would you agree?
I think it depends. I feel like Vettori has the ability to make it a not close fight, because I feel like the more that he's willing to offensively grapple, I feel like he can ground Cannonier. Cannonier has good skills to get back to his feet, but because he's a very muscle-bound man, and he, as I say, he's not used to putting out vast amounts of output, if you can force him to give more output than he is used to, you'll drain him over those first 3 rounds. And so the second and the second half of the fight, it's not really a half, but you know what I mean, the final 2 rounds of the fight, you can start to up the pace if you're Vettori, and you can start to really force the issue and take those rounds away from him in what would be a clearer cut win. But the way I actually see it going, like you said, he adds things into his game. We saw new wrinkles against Elidze, but Marvin Vettori is always in his career has shown us he beats that level of fighter. The level of fighter that's just underneath the absolute elite of his division, he beats those fighters. And then he meets an Israel Adesanya, or he meets a Rob Whittaker, and he loses those fights, and there's absolutely no shame in that. But I would like to think Vettori can come out here, and this is his way of getting back to some form of Israel Adesanya rematch. Maybe he has to have another one after this. I don't know, whatever. But this is his way. If he goes out, puts a pace on Cannonier and drowns him in that pace, this is the way that he can jump on the mic afterwards and say, look, lads, I've done what I needed to do. Cannonier's the only other elite guy, and here we are. But I agree with you, and I absolutely see a potential for both of these guys to fight to almost a stalemate.
And the only reason I would say that would be based off the fact that I feel that Jared Cannonier's strikes might land a little bit more impactfully in this fight, in the exchanges as well. And I'd be interested to see how that plays out and how the judges see it. But I'm just sitting here, man, and I hope that we are not dealing with Saturday night and Sunday with everybody bitching about judging again, because it's getting so tiresome now at this stage. It's just crazy. But look, like we said, intriguing fight at the top of the middleweight division. We'll talk about the co-main event now, and that's Arman Tsarukyan, a guy we've been talking about for quite some time, Harry. Obviously a big fan. Has kind of took a little bit of a step back, and I'm here for that. I mean, the Moicano fight I thought was a perfect fight. Obviously he pulled out. Joaquim Silva is your guy who has replaced him, and I've labeled a couple of fights this before. I would like to label this one as well a bit of a showcase fight for Arman Tsarukyan, where I think if he can come in and showcase the level of skills that he has shown in previous fights, he should be able to put Joaquim Silva away. And then that's another notch on your highlight reel. That's another finish. And then you're putting yourself in prime position to take on probably top 8 competition heading in next. I'll talk about this fight first, and then I'll talk about maybe what may come after this fight. But maybe just your thoughts on this matchup and what Arman Tsarukyan needs to do to maybe throw his name back into contention in the lightweight division. Obviously went out there, picked up a good win in his last fight, and fighting another relatively unknown guy in this fight as well. But that's no harm. It's a chance for him to get in there and to kind of showcase his skills, and it gets better in between camp. And I feel that his next run towards the top of the division is going to be his most important one, but he has to get over Joaquim Silva first.
So I think the Demiris Magulov win is an unbelievable win. I think that not many people know Demiris Magulov, but he is an absolutely phenomenal fighter. I think he is going to be a significant player in that lightweight division in years to come. I know he's a little bit on the older side, but he is an absolutely brilliant fighter. And to go out and watch Arman perform the way he did in that fight was fantastic. I think Moicano was the right next step for Arman after that fight. Obviously, gets injured or has to pull out for whatever reason, that's fine. And so if you're Arman Tsarukyan now, you kind of just take whatever the UFC are going to give you. At the end of the day, you want to fight. You've been delayed 3 months, at this point. No, 2 months. And so just give me a fight, right? Whoever it is, just give me a contract, give me a fight. And obviously, lots of the guys at the top aren't going to take a fight on shorter notice. Obviously, an 8-week camp isn't exactly short notice, but lots of guys will not be taking fights when this sort of situation arises. And so Joaquim Silva, this is an absolutely huge opportunity for him. I think it's going to be a very, very tough fight for him. And to answer your question, what does Arman Tsarukyan need to do? It's just fight like he fights. If Arman goes out and doesn't disrespect the level of Joaquim Silva, because I think Joaquim Silva is significant levels below, but you see certain fighters will go out and they'll know that they're significantly better, and so they'll take unnecessary risk, and this is MMA at the end of the day. If you get caught, you're lying on your back, staring up at the lights. But if he goes out and performs anywhere near what we saw both in the Matoya Gamrot fight, in the Islam Makhachev fight, or any of the fights since he's been in the UFC, he will steamroll Joaquim Silva and he will add a highlight reel to his resume.
And I think that's exactly what he needs to do to kind of just put the whole division on notice here. Like you know me, I'm a guy who's spoken. I like guys going out there with killer instincts. I like guys going out there and finishing fights. I think it's obviously the one big reason why the UFC will look at you and want to push you up the division if you are going out there and putting guys away. And I think he definitely has the skills to do it. I think he has the fight IQ not to get too crazy and get caught or anything like that. But yeah, we're getting into the business end of things now with Arman Tsarukyan again. Once he kind of gets this win under his belt, like you're spot on in what you're saying, and that you need to get in there and fight, and you have to give Tsarukyan credit for doing that. Like I said, look at an unknown name in Ismagulov, but he is, in fairness to the general masses, Ismagulov is an unknown name, but like you said, a very excellent fighter as well at the same time. But you don't get remembered if you're not in there fighting. You know what I mean? And Tsarukyan has kind of picked up that hat, and he's willing to go in there and he's willing to fight down, and he's willing not to let to sit on the sidelines if higher up opposition doesn't want to take him on short notice or even fight at all. I believe a couple of guys turned him down for this fight as well, but it just shows how competitive he is, how hungry he is, and how eager he is to perform in there by going in and fighting guys like Joaquim Silva. He could have easily just said, no, I'm not going to fight on this card. I'll wait for Renato Moicano to get recovered and we'll go back and do it in. But like I said, you're on the sidelines, you're going to get forgotten about, because the UFC is a juggernaut and they'll have guys coming through and coming through and coming through. Give me Arman Tsarukyan fighting any day of the week and I'm going to be watching it. I can't wait to see him go in there and take on Joaquim Silva this weekend. I expect him to get a finish. I mean, I expect him, and I would like for him to go out there and have a statement performance and a statement finish. Like, give me a Joel Alvarez performance there when we're like looking at each other saying, holy fuck, that was crazy after the fight is over. And then you get onto the microphone and you call out Beneil Dariush, but we'll talk a little bit more about that on the balance breakdown. I said I'd leave you that tidbit. I'll leave you that tidbit, and we will, like I said, we'll be back on the balance breakdown on Tuesday, and we will talk about that a little bit more. Christian Leroy Duncan is next in line. He's back for his next fight in the UFC, 8-0, taking on Armen Petrosyan. Great fight for Christian Leroy Duncan. I'm very happy to see him getting matched up with these kind of fights so early into his UFC career, Harry, because we have seen from time and time again where guys are coming in and they're getting a little bit outmatched a little bit too early. He will feel that he has somewhat a bit of unfinished business coming in here, obviously, with that Dusko Todorovic fight. It was a bit unlucky that Todorovic kind of busted out his knee and we didn't kind of get to see Christian Leroy Duncan put out his full level of skills to the public. But I feel with Petrosyan, this is a good stylistic matchup for him to showcase at least his striking skills as well. And I can't imagine Petrosyan is going to be a guy who's going to be looking to take this fight down. So we could be in for a really intriguing striking battle in this fight. Would you kind of agree with that?
I would not be shocked if Leroy Duncan throws in some takedowns here. I really wouldn't, because it's not like we haven't seen him grapple before. It's not like it's not like he can't grapple, right? I think the thing that I like about these sets of performances and these sets of matches, as you say, is whilst it's kind of an interesting place with Christian Leroy Duncan because he's had such a storied amateur career, and then, okay, he's 8-0, but he's also 27, right? And so if he goes and he wins this fight, we're going to need to take a significant step up, I think, because whilst we're in a situation where he's 27 and that means he still has bags of time, right? If he's a champion at 30, 31, 32, that's perfect timing. But then it's like, okay, well, we then need to capitalize on being a champion, and we don't want to be slipping out of our prime as we've just become a champion, or we're in that upper echelon of the division. And okay, as we've just said, middleweight, not the most stacked division in the UFC, but I feel like now at 27, 28, 29, these are the times that Christian Leroy Duncan is going to need to start to make a real stamp. And so against somebody like Petrosian, who we saw, he has an incredible chin when he fought RoboCop. Like, this feels like a perfect style of matchup for him. If he wants to stand and bang, Petrosian will absolutely engage in that sort of a battle. And if he wants to do a little bit more of the MMA stuff, where we see some cage takedowns, we see some this, because RoboCop did the same thing, I think he has the opportunity to do this. But I feel like this, again, is the UFC doing we know that you're good. Please go out and announce to everyone that you are good. Because as you say, the Todorovic performance was a good one, but it sort of ended in a weird situation that was a bit of a freak accident. And, even Christian Leroy Duncan immediately afterwards looked disappointed in himself, looked disappointed in the result. And obviously Todorovic doesn't want to lose a fight that way either. So yeah, I think this is another similar style, similar level matchup, maybe a touch higher than Dusko Todorovic, but we're in a situation where we're in Leroy Duncan's primary wheelhouse. And so I'm expecting him to go out, look good, potentially get a finish.
For sure, yeah. I kind of expect the same here. And just to the level of competition is like, I slightly disagree a little bit, whereas I wouldn't be too upset even seeing him for the next 3 or 4 fights fighting guys similar to this level. At the age of 27, it's not that, like, if we're talking about a guy who was coming in here at 30 or 31 years of age, well then, yeah, we've got to get the wheels moving a little bit quicker then. But I mean, you've got to find your feet in the UFC a little bit too. And I wouldn't be disappointed. But I mean, if Christian Leroy Duncan goes out there and absolutely takes the head off of Armin Petrosian this weekend, like, I mean, then you probably have no choice but to kind of move him up a little bit. Are you going to just keep him in there with guys he's just going to take the head off? And you have to put him in there with kind of maybe a good grappler next or something like that to kind of test his all-round skills. It'll be interesting to see how they will kind of market him per se. Do you think it's a bit of a miss? Because let's be real, all right, maybe he goes out there and gets a good win, but we're just a little bit of a month away from the UK card, and I'm surprised he's actually not on that card. I mean, we've talked about this before in fighters being placed in strange kind of, who was the last one that we talked about? Was it was Arnold Allen out there when he fought Max Holloway and other fighters like that. Do you think the UFC missed a little bit of a step by not putting CLD on the London card?
I mean, I think it depends, right? Because if he goes out and he's in a good card placement, so if he goes out and he absolutely destroys Petrosian, well, then this is your, hi, US fans, I'm Christian Leroy Duncan, and it gives them something to talk about. But in the same vein, one of the reasons we're talking about Mike Malott, for instance, is because he goes out in Canada, in the home show, secures the clean sweep and does it with a finish. And so this, to me, it's like you're after stealing the moment away from him a little bit, because I don't feel that he would have got that closure in his last fight with Todorovic. You know what I mean? Whereas that you had the injury, it was a little bit of a kind of up in the air. He was disappointed, obviously, that he didn't want the fight to end that way. But look, I understand what you're saying as well. I mean, you're third from the top on a Vegas card. And it is, yeah, it's a good chance to showcase your abilities to the US audience. And you never know, we may get the best of both worlds here as well, Harry. He may go out there and finish Petrosian early. He might come out unscathed, yeah, and he might land over in that UK card. Please continue. Sorry for interrupting. No, not at all. I was just going to bolt on that London card, as far as I'm aware, still doesn't have a co-main event.
Well, that's the thing. Yeah, there's a lot of fights that have to be filled up there, so it'll be interesting to see. Look, we'll talk a little bit about Modestas Bukauskas later on, but we could say the same about him as well. But yeah, interesting to see 8-0 Christian Leroy Duncan. He's definitely one to watch. He's definitely a great prospect, and one, Sean is a big fan of him, thinks very highly of him, and as do I. I think he's a much needed talent in a very talentless middleweight division right now. So it'd be very interesting to see how he goes out there and handles Armin Petrosian on Saturday night. Moving on down to my guy Pat Sabatini, who's going in there to face Lucas Almeida. I mean, Sabatini has been having a little bit of an up and a down UFC career. He's come in. I like his style. I like his aggressiveness. He's a good top heavy grappler, has some good technique on the feet, like not a super explosive striker, but he dots his or crosses his T's and dots his I's on the feet a little bit. When you see him match up here, obviously Lucas Almeida, another good guy coming through as well at 14-1. He's back on the win column after losing his Contender Series fight, picked up a nice win over Mike Trezano on his UFC debut, has had a couple of fights fall through since. He lands in front of Pat Sabatini, but another exciting prospect and another exciting finisher as well. And in certain respects, I'd be surprised if this fight went all 3 rounds. Would you?
Yeah, I think it really depends on what Pat Sabatini turns up, right? We've seen him go in and grind guys and really break them with that wrestling style. But then we've also seen him just not look great, and we've seen him falter, and we've seen him sort of second guess himself and end up in situations like in the Damon Jackson fight where he just gets his back taken for 3 rounds. And I don't imagine Lucas Almeida is going to do a ton of the wrestling in this. I think he's going to be looking to do a similar performance to the Mike Trezano, where he just keeps landing damage and keeps chipping away and keeps breaking his man down on the feet until eventually he can work to a finish. And that's what he said. He said as much in the media week this week, is that he's looking to just emulate that performance as many times as he can when he goes out there. And that's going to win him a lot of fans. Like, he's not going to be a fighter that wins every fight with a fighting style like that. But he will go out and he will have fun fights, and the UFC brass will like him. And this to me is, it's like, on every fight night card, or on every card at the moment for the UFC, it seems like there's a bit of a playbook. And thankfully, we're not witness to the big
heavyweight. I was going to say it. I'd take a fight like this any day of the week instead of some fucking out of ranked fucking sloppy heavyweights any day of the week, like any day of the week. And thankfully we've kind of exited away. We've not seen that for a couple of fight cards, and it's a little bit refreshing, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, you're going to get one or the other, it seems, right? Like, you're either going to get the not fantastically skilled but both willing to bite down and throw type slobber knocker, or you're going to get big meaty men doing big meaty things. And like you, whilst I'm not the greatest fan of either, frankly, I would much prefer to take the former than the latter. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. And I think, we could probably say the same about the next fight as well, Harry. And that's Manuel Torres, who goes in to take on Nicholas Motta in the 155-pound division. Two kind of unranked lightweights hungry to get up and stake their claim in a very talent-rich lightweight division. Obviously, Nicola Motta coming in off his win against Cameron Van Camp. It was a good left hook, followed by ground strikes in the first round for him, picking up his first UFC win with Manuel Torres. He's trying to ride on the wave of the Mexican success in mixed martial arts at the minute, coming in here on a 4-fight win streak off the Contender Series and another finish against Frank Camacho on his debut. Got 2 finishers coming in here, and this one could be lightning as well, depending on, I mean, as a fighter, you've got to make that decision, Harry, don't you? You've got to go in there and say, am I going to fight to win, or am I going to fight to finish? And fighters can feel different ways on different nights. And we see some fighters going in there fighting to win, and that's okay. We see fighters going in there fighting to finish. But sometimes when you're fighting to finish, you can end up getting finished yourself. So it's kind of that double-edged sword that you have to deal with going in there. How do you see these two guys matching up?
I'm not sure on the level of Motta just yet. Jim Miller is a really, really hard debut. Really hard debut. One, because at this point in his career, this is literally what he's doing, right? He's picking up the prospects and he's chewing them out. Now, Cameron Van Camp is not a good fighter. Yeah. And so Motta going out and wasting him does not tell me a thing. Well, or at least what it tells me is that he's not mid-level regional fighter. Fine, no problem. But when I look at somebody like Manuel Torres, who comes in and absolutely destroys his man on Contender Series and then goes out and destroys Frank Camacho, that tells me something. Frank Camacho, again, not the most skilled fighter, but had been around the UFC a little while now, has won some fights, has lost some fights. And so I'm leaning based on the strength of schedule and based on the fact that he's just a little bit more rangy and seems to hit just a little bit harder. A lot of those finishes are coming in the first round. There is certainly a grappling deficiency, both of his losses coming by submission. I'm leaning towards Torres, but this, it's Motta's third UFC appearance now, so there's no excuses for UFC jitters. And if he comes out riding high after the Van Camp performance and we see actually who he is, I know that Kaposa on Twitter was really high on Motta when he came in. And so let's see if he shows me what Kaposa is excited about.
Yeah, absolutely. Obviously, we're talking about two guys relatively new inside the UFC, but we'll move to two guys who are no strangers to the octagon, who have been around for quite some time. And I mean, this is a 6-fight main card. This is the fight that's going to open it, and it's a doozy of a fight too. Two veteran bruisers going in here, and I'm very excited to see how both of these guys match up. Muslim Salikov is a guy who, something I like to do myself when I was kind of fighting and sparring, is you can lure people into certain paces where I used to like to try and set a slow pace and then explode into shots where you're kind of trying to catch people off guard. I think Muslim Salikov does that quite well, especially with his spinning attacks, where he's like, okay, we're going to get your rhythm. We're going to get your rhythm. Oh, I have your rhythm forward. Oh no, you're spinning, kicking me in the head. And that's exactly what happened with Andre Fajalio in his last fight. With Nicholas Dalby, we know what Nicholas Dalby wants to do. He wants to go in here. He wants to make it a dirty, grindy fight. He wants to take you down. He wants to put you against the cage. He wants to put you on your back. And it's going to be very interesting to see if Salikov can keep him off it, because I would give the striking advantage here to Salikov, but I probably would give the strength and the grappling advantage to Nicholas Dalby. And it's an interesting stylistic matchup that way, Harry. How do you see it going?
I think I'd agree if it were a pure striking match. If we were in a kickboxing fight or a Muay Thai or a Taekwondo bout, I would absolutely put all of my money on Muslim Salikov. The thing that Dalby does and does a great job of is he has an ability to keep an intensity. And I agree with you that in certain fights, in certain scenarios against certain opponents, baiting them into slowing their rhythm down and having more of a point style battle for you to then explode into is great. But the antidote to that is a mad cunt that can keep an 80% intensity the entire time. So if I'm Muslim Salikov, or even if I'm Nicholas Dalby, the worry here is exactly that. It's intensity. Because if I'm Dalby and I set too high a pace and Muslim Salikov sets me up for something and lands, my night's over, right? If Dalby is almost forcing the issue too much and is coming in too hot and heavy and is really looking to land, really looking to set the pace, Salikov can absolutely catch him with something wild. We've seen it multiple times in Salikov's career. If not, I think Dalby runs him over. I really do, because Dalby has added things to his game. He's got far rangier kicks now. His leg kicks look good. He's leaping into things. He's stance switching. And then obviously he's got that hard-nosed, grindy sort of wrestling style that we are used to from his previous UFC run and obviously his Cage Warriors runs. And I just think when you've got a low output fighter like Salikov, the antidote to them is just never let them get off their shots. And the way you do that is by drowning them. And Dalby has that ability in spades. But make no mistake about it. If Dalby makes mistakes, he's getting finished.
And that's it. And I think it's more so about here for Dalby moving Salikov onto the back foot rather than, because he does quite enjoy lulling and moving forward and kind of cutting off the cage. What he wants to do is he wants to get Nicholas Dalby's back against the cage as close as he can. And that's where he'll produce his spinning attacks, because when your back is against the cage, you ain't got nowhere to move to get out of the way of those attacks. And it'll be look at these two guys, Salikov 39, Dalby 38. They're not going to be going too far up the division. But I love these style of matchups. Two older veterans at the same age with similar skill sets. And that's what's going to make this an interesting fight, rather than throwing these guys in with some young, hungry bulls where you're going to see them absolutely destroyed. This is good matchmaking by the UFC. And it's a great fight to open up the main card as well. We're going to have to crack the sirens possibly for the next one, because that's Honey Barcelos versus Miles Johns. We'll be putting the banger alerts out on Saturday night. This is a card or a fight that's going to top the prelims card. And, we're talking about two absolute finishers here, two guys who will go out there and throw 100% into their shots. And it's a fight that anything could happen in, Harry, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, to me, this is grappling versus striking. This really is grappling versus striking. I really don't know where Hannibal Barcelos is right now. 1-3 in his last 4, but he's fighting, Timur Valiev, who I think is a good fighter. I think, the fight with Jack Shaw showed you just how good Timur Valiev is. You lose to Victor Henry. Okay. You go out and beat Trevin Jones. Trevin Jones, not a great fighter. And then you get whacked by Nurmagomedov. These things happen. I got whatever. You go in and you fight Cousin Umar. These things happen. I got no problem with it. So, but it's just hard to know where Hannibal Barcelos is right now. And so I don't know. I don't know. And
I would like to label who he is. I think he's a man who's fighting for his UFC career in this fight, to be honest, because I think he goes out and drops this one. I couldn't see him hanging around too much longer. The UFC willing to hang on to him for too much longer. Like, we're talking about the bantamweight division here. This is just, it's a shit hot division. You know what I mean? And there's lots of people waiting outside the rankings to try to get into the rankings. There's a lot of people outside of the UFC that are waiting to get into the UFC. And I mean, Ronnie Barcelos, he's there, like you said, 1-3 in his last 4. He's 36. If he drops another one, I think it could be curtains on his career. And I'm always excited to see how a fighter will approach that when, he's got to be thinking that himself. Would you imagine he is, Harry?
100%. And especially at his age as well, right? Like,
yeah,
you got to be thinking, I've been fighting a long time, lads. Do I still want to put my body through this? Like, what sort of situation am I in? I'm certainly not going to be on a title run anytime soon in this division with all these fucking monsters ahead of me. Like, he's going to just turn into the Jim Miller type of this division? Because if so, I got no problem with it. Fine, fair play. If that's what you want to do with your career, that, you do that, no problem. But if not, like you say, he needs to win here. 1-3 in his last 4 is not a good return. And 2-3 in your last 5 looks way better than 1-4 in your last 5, right?
100%. Moving on down to the 125-pound division. I said we're going to nitpick a couple of fights here, but they all have a little bit of interest now, if I'm being honest. Jimmy Flick. What are we thinking here, Harry, with Jimmy Flick? I mean, he didn't look great on the feet in his last fight. He got beaten in the first round and took a lot of damage there as well. It seems he's pretty one-dimensional, and if he can't get the fight down, he's normally in trouble. And I mean, coming in here against Alexander Costa, who did lose his last fight, but that was to Almir Albazi, who just recently beat Kai Kara France. I'm not sure if you heard about that fight, but but Alexander Costa is coming in hungry after losing his first fight in about 7 or 8. So he's going to be coming back in here. He's not looking to be on to lose here against Jimmy Flick. And I'm sure he'll be happy enough with this matchup. How do you think of this? We're talking about a guy who's coming in here as a good, decent grappler. A grappler who goes out and finishes fights as well. Are we worried for Jimmy Flick in this and for his health and well-being, or what are we thinking?
I mean, I was impressed with Alessandro Da Costa in his fight with Amir Albazi. To take Amir Albazi 3 rounds and to look good in some spots, right? He looked like he caused Amir some problems, and Amir had to be thinking, and eventually he found the timing and landed his shots fine, no problem. We're talking about a guy that's just gone and supposedly, I don't know, got a win over Kai Kara France. That's what Twitter tells me. But this to me is the UFC saying, look, I understand what happened was a bit too much of a push. We'll start you all the way at the bottom and let's see how we go from here. Now, if his performance was anything like it was against Demir, then we're looking at Jimmy Flick having a really tough night yet again. But in the same vein, I think this was the right kind of test that he should have had in the first place, right? And so let's see this fight. Because if he goes in and he struggles with the grappling of Jimmy Flick, well, then we've learned something else, right? And we've learned that maybe that, in a similar vein to Steven Erceg, but kind of different, he goes in with a top 10 ranked fighter as a complete debutant. Well, there's no pressure on you now. You're not supposed to win this. You're not even supposed to be competitive in this. You're coming in from the regional scene, fighting an absolute monster. There's absolutely no reason for you to win this whatsoever. Yeah. And so if Costa comes in, Albazi, and just fights out of his skin because there's absolutely no pressure on him whatsoever, and we now see that his level is maybe just a touch underneath that, fine. But this is a fantastic opportunity for him to come in and be like, actually, I am fucking great. And that Albazi fight was just a bit too much too soon for me. I've still got some improving to do, but I'm coming.
And it seems like you said as well, the UFC has recognized that as well and saying, sorry for putting you in that last predicament, but here's our little bit of a makeup here. Here's a good winnable fight for you against Jimmy Flick in the 125-pound division. Interesting to see. I'm excited to see that. I am worried for Jimmy Flick in this fight. I mean, he's in trouble when he can't get the fight down, and I can't see him doing it here. Maybe he'll prove me wrong, but we will find out on Saturday night. The next two fights, Kyung Ho Kang versus Kristen Cannonier, Carlos Hernandez versus Denise Bodner, Kang versus Cannonier in 135-pound division, Hernandez versus Bodnar in the 125-pound division. We won't spend too much time on those fights. We also have Felipe Bunes versus Zagis Zamigulov in the 125-pound division as well. We'll scoot right over there. You're looking forward to seeing Teresa Bleda go in there again. She takes on Gabriela Fernandez in the women's 125-pound division. What has you excited to see Teresa go back in there and perform, Harry?
So the reason why I'm excited to see her perform again is, one, she was put in there with an absolute murderer in her performance, in her debut. Like Natalia Silva, I think, is going to be a really interesting player in this division in the years to come. And big so time. Whilst we have seen, we've seen that, it's the new Ronda Rousey, it's the this, it's the that, she's a judoka, she's got some submissions, whatever. I'm just interested to see what happens now, right? You went in, it was a tough fight. You took a really, really, really tough loss. You've had some time away. Absolutely should have. We're talking 6 months away. Great, no problem. Heal up, get yourself in the gym, fix the mistakes from last time, and let's see now, because she was carrying a lot of hype coming in here. And so show me that. Show me what's happening. Show me why I should be paying attention.
Yeah, and I mean, her opponent, Gabriela Fernandez, in the same kind of predicament as well. Lost her UFC debut against Jasmine Jasdavicius. And I mean, she'll have a lot to prove as well. It's not easy to go in there and fight Jazzy J. I don't know if that's her nickname, but it is now. I think, it's much easier than saying Jasdavicius anyway. I'm after saying it correct twice, though, so I'm on a good roll there now. But that's because I was probably saying it all last week. You know yourself, Harry. That takes place in the 125-pound division. Ronnie Lawrence, who I cannot see that name or look at him without thinking that he's a Scouser. He takes on Daniel Argueta in the bantamweight division. I mean, at this stage, Harry, from what we've seen on previous UFC cards, I mean, you're going to throw two 135-pounders in there and you kind of know you're going to get a good fight no matter who it is, because it's the best division in the UFC right now, hands down, in my opinion. The talent that is there is unreal. And these two guys have the opportunity to kind of, stake their claim, try and work their way towards the rankings, not quite there yet, either one of these guys. You like Ronnie Lawrence, don't you?
I have a soft spot for Ronnie Lawrence. I wrote about Ronnie Lawrence in his debut against Vince Cachero, and just the style of grappling was just really, really interesting and really fresh. And it reminded me a little bit of Gregor Gillespie in his grappling, and I really like Greg Gillespie. I think he's a big miss from the UFC 145-pound division. But I think I'm just interested in seeing the grappling here. That's all I care about. Just give me the grappling. Against Damon Jackson, Dan Argueta didn't have the best of times. But what I saw from Dan Argueta, and this prompted some of the conversations I had with Shawnee, is Damon Jackson in that fight had Dan Argueta's back for basically 3 rounds. But Dan Argueta did the majority of the damage by landing shots to Damon Jackson and swelling up his eye and doing the whole thing. And obviously, he trains with Dustin Poirier, so we know that he's getting those reps, and we know he's in the room with high-level guys. And so just give me the grappling. I pray that this is not one of those fights where you've got 2 guys who can do a bit of grappling that decide to kickbox. Just let me see some grappling, please.
Give that man some grappling given to him. You heard him, Daniel and Ronnie. We'll see what happens on Saturday night. And last but not least, let's talk some Modestas Bukauskas, who's come in for his second run in the UFC. And I'm really happy to see him getting matched up like this as well. We're not throwing the guy to the wolves anymore. And, you know, we're talking about a guy here who's coming in, like I said, for his second UFC run. And eventually, when it hopefully does happen soon for Rhys McKee, I would hope that he gets the similar enough treatment as well, and that he gets these kind of lower tier matchups to allow himself to get settled back in. You know, obviously he took a big chance, Modestas did, in his last fight by taking it on short notice. So you know what? Get in there, you'll get your rewards against Zach Pauga, who is a very winnable fight here for Modestas, isn't he, Harry?
Oh, stop. This is should be an absolute gimme fight here. Mm-hmm. Zach Pauga is not a great fighter. I don't know what else to say, really. Like, he took the fight against Muhammad Usman at heavyweight. He's now fighting at light heavyweight, which is the division he should have been in the first place. Fine, no problem. Let's see for Zach Pauga if he looks any different, having, you know, his more natural weight for fighting. Is he a bit more agile? Does he move a little bit better? I know that Spencer is not high on Pauga, but thinks he's much better than the Muhammad Usman performance. And so Modestas goes in and gets an absolute statement win over Tyson Pedro. You know, Tyson Pedro is a stalwart of the division, is somebody that is okay. He's hit and miss. Sometimes he turns up, looks great. Sometimes he turns up and just has a bit of a stinker. But I certainly felt like Modestas took that fight away from him rather than Tyson Pedro losing that fight. And so in this one, this is you should be levels above this gentleman. Feel free, go in, do whatever it is you're going to do, settle yourself back into the UFC. Welcome.
You got to be a UFC. You got to be looking at a finish here if you're Modestas. I think, look at Pauga was unlucky against Usman, was winning that fight before he got clipped, but he went in there the last time against Jordan Wright, and he wasn't great either. It wasn't a great fight. It was a boring, unanimous decision. I don't remember it verbatim, but I do remember thinking, oh, this isn't great, because like Spencer was right in what he's saying. I also felt that Zach Pauga was better than that Muhammad Usman performance. So I was looking forward to seeing him come in here against Jordan Wright the last time and maybe just kind of up his level a little bit, but it didn't really happen. So obviously he moved down to the light heavyweight division. He fought Usman at heavyweight too, I believe, wasn't it? Yeah. So he's down at light heavyweight now as well. But tough task in Modestas Bukauskas. Are you happy with the way he's been matched here? Like, because, you know, you go out and you take out Tyson Pedro on a pay-per-view card, who's like not a ranked name, but I would like to say a fairly well-known name with Pedro. And now you go from that fight to the bottom of a fight night card against, an Ultimate Fighter finale finalist, I guess. So, I mean, how do you think about the way he's been matched up before we wrap it up?
Pretty happy. I think, Modestas, okay, he's in his late 20s, right? 29, just turned 29, or is going to be 20, is going to be 30 this year. But like, this is the light heavyweight division. You can go way longer. And it feels to me as though, like you say, I'm much more comfortable with this type of matchmaking. Like you say, okay, your opportunity comes on short notice. We also know that the UFC have a habit of, if you come in on short notice, especially as short notice as Modescus was, I think it was 6 days notice, then they are going to favor you. They're going to give you a return of some form. If he went out and lost that fight to Tyson Pedro, it is almost certain that he would have got another opportunity anyway. And if he goes out and wins, generally the UFC like to reward those fighters, or it seems like they reward those fighters with matchups that are more favorable to them. Obviously, we can't confirm that. We don't know that for a fact, but based on our historical reading of these sorts of situations, that's what happens. And so if I'm Modescus Bukauskas, like you say, I am going out hunting for a finish. Absolutely hunting for a finish.
Indeed, I agree with everything that you said. UFC politics are alive and well. They exist. That wraps us up for a card. Like I said, a pretty good card. We brought you through it relatively quickly here. We'll be back on Tuesday to break it down in full detail after all the action happens as well. But this is a good one, folks. I'm excited to see it. It's back in the Apex, but it's a really good card. Lots of fights spread out throughout it. Any final thoughts, Harry, before we wrap her up?
I think one thing I wanted to ask is, who have you got for fight of the night on this one?
Who have I got for fight of the night on this one? If Marvin Vettori and Jared Cannonier decide to open up even slightly, I could see them getting fight of the night. I could see it going 5 rounds, but I don't know if it is. Apart from that, you're looking at you could look at it like if Petrosian does kind of withstand Christian Leroy Duncan's attacks on the feet, we could be looking at that as a fight of the night. I mean, the certified banger that we mentioned, and that's who do we say? Miles Johns versus
Pat Sabatini versus Lucas Almeida, Hannibal versus Miles Johns, and Salikov Dalby.
I mean, that tells the story of the card here, where we're picking out a couple where I don't know. It's like a couple of these have potential to be fighters of the night. Look at hashtag UFC politics. Let's talk it again. Normally, they're going to be looking at some fight on the main card, and they like to favor the main events. So that's why I'm saying even if the main event delivers 60%, I feel that they could get fight of the night if it's a close fought fight, if we get a couple of close rounds, and if it's only if Vettori and Cannonier both decide to kind of let loose here, because I mean, both guys are fighting for probably a last crack at the title. I don't see Jared Cannonier probably getting a crack even if he wins this, but especially Marvin Vettori, challengers at the top of the 185 division now are few and far between. He went in there and fought a fight against Izzy the last time, claims he won when he clearly didn't, but maybe Israel want to kind of run that back and maybe try and get Marvin out of there. So look, it'll be interesting to see. The fights will go down Saturday, June 17th in the UFC Apex. Like I said, we'll be back on the Balance Breakdown on Tuesday to take a deep look at these. Harry will be back on Monday with the severe spotlight on one of these fighters. You can follow him at BJJ_Harry Powell on Twitter, Instagram, and wherever you find it. Go and check out his stuff on SevereMMA.com and check out Speaker's Corner and other podcasts along those lines over on the Severe MMA Patreon. Sign up, help us out. A $5, you're going to get good damn value for money over there. If you liked what you hear, give us an old like, give us an old share, tell a friend, give us an old retweet. Your support goes a long, long way. And we will see you soon. Follow me at O'Neill MMA. I've got lots of stuff coming out. I've got the Out Triangle, everything. We'll be back on Tuesday. That's the main one to break this fight card down. Good luck. God bless. And enjoy the fights on Saturday night.